The flagship was dead. No engines, no lights, just a hollow drifting through the dark, venting what was left of its air into open space, and standing in the middle of it, 3 Saiyans who had nothing left to hit. Kael reached for it first. The gold. The thing that had put Frieza on his knees. Violet flickered along his arm, guttered and went out. That was all. That was everything he had. Vegeta saw it happen. "Do it again," he said. Kael looked at him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. It was gone. It had not been taken from him. It had simply stopped answering. And Vegeta understood exactly what that meant, and hated understanding it. So Goku did what Goku does. He sat down on a broken hull plate, tore a strip off his own vest, and started patching the pieces of them that were still bleeding. For a while, none of them spoke. It was the first ordinary minute in 100 years. Kael had spent that century as the last line in a ledger. One name, the final entry of a dead species, kept alive out of nothing but stubbornness. There were 3 names in it now. Vegeta broke the quiet, and he did not break it kindly. "I am not thanking you," he said. "I am telling you. 3 is what we are, so we train, all of us, starting now." Goku said the part Vegeta couldn't. "We didn't get up for Saiyan pride," he said. "We got up for him. That's why it worked." Later, alone at the far end of the deck, Kael tried again. Calm, controlled, everything he knew how to be. He reached for the gold and found the same cold nothing waiting for him. And standing there in the dark, he finally understood it. The aura had not come for rage. Rage he had carried for 100 years, and it had never once been enough. It came the moment he stopped being the last one. It came because he finally had something to lose, which meant he could not call it. It would call him. They left the wreck together. 3 figures against open space, going home to whatever home meant now. Very far away, in a room with no crew and no windows, something was already awake. A facility. Cold light. Black racks running floor to ceiling, and every one of them full. Combat telemetry, genome scans. Every fight, every wound, every technique any of them had ever used, logged and measured and filed. Frieza had not been fighting them. He had been collecting them. And in the center of the room stood a tank of pale amber fluid, and in the tank hung something with Saiyan proportions that had never been born. Seams down its arms, ports at its spine, faint gold light moving under grey skin. The last entry in the archive was Kael's new power. Recorded, measured, copied. In the dark it opened its eyes. They were gold. Earth came up out of the dark, blue and white, and impossibly loud with life. Kael had not seen a living world in 100 years. He had forgotten they made a sound. The ship came down in a field. When the hatch opened, the first thing that reached him was not light or heat. It was the smell of grass. He stepped out and stopped. 100 years of ash and recycled air, and now this. Soft ground. Wind with nothing dangerous in it. He did not know what to do with his hands. Goku's house stood at the edge of the field, and a woman in the doorway was shouting at Goku about the state of his vest. Nobody had ever shouted at a Saiyan about laundry. They ate. The first meal Kael had taken sitting down at a table since planet Vegeta burned. Goku ate like a natural disaster. Kael ate slowly because he kept expecting an alarm. Vegeta did not sit down. He stood outside, arms folded, looking at the horizon like it owed him something. Peace was not a thing he knew how to do. In the morning, he was already waiting. "Show me," he said, "not the gold, you. What is left when the gold does not come?" Kael reached for it anyway. Old habit. Violet ghosted along his forearm, thin as breath, and died. Vegeta put him in the dirt 4 times before he stopped reaching. Goku pulled him up on the 5th. "You keep hunting it," he said. "That is why it will not come. It came because you had something to lose. So stop chasing the power. Build the thing worth losing." So Kael trained, not for the gold. Weighted plates, thin air, and a mountain that did not care who he used to be. Weeks, Goku beside him every day, laughing, correcting, pushing. Kael got faster, Kael got stronger, the gold never came, and slowly he stopped listening for it. Vegeta watched from the ridge and said on the 11th day that he was less useless than he had been. From Vegeta, that was practically an embrace. Then, on a quiet evening, hands empty and mind on nothing at all, the violet caught. Half a second. Warm, unasked for. He had not reached for it. It had come to him. Very far away, in a room with no crew and no windows, the tank stood open, and the pale amber fluid had drained across the floor. It was empty. Nobody on Earth knew. The room had no windows and no crew. The tank stood open. Pale amber fluid had drained across the floor and was already going cold. Nothing had raised an alarm. Wider then. It was not one tank. A corridor of them ran back into the dark, most of them sealed, most of them still occupied. A records wall glowed at the far end. Numbered entries, thousands deep. Someone had been keeping count for 100 years. The empty one sat far down the list, and it was not the last. 100 years ago, planet Vegeta came apart. Everything with an engine ran. One shuttle did not run. It turned and went back down toward the fire. Sealed figures dropped through the ash on cables. Grey suits, mirrored faceplates, no insignia, no faces. They had not come down there to rescue anybody. They were collecting. Tissue, blood still warm, bone. A whole people reduced to material and stacked into cold cases while the sky came down above them. Deeper in the building, on a shelf, sat a pod. Small, catalogued. Kael had been inside this place once, a long time ago, as an item on an inventory. Most of the attempts did not hold. Rows of them, floor to ceiling, quiet. Things that had almost been Saiyan, that had stopped part way and had been kept anyway. One held. It grew for decades in the dark while nobody spoke to it. It had a face before it ever had a thought, and the face was not its own. There was no crew because something had happened to them. Not a fight, no burn marks, no alarms, no bodies. They had simply stopped being in the room. A log was still running in the empty air, patient, recording nothing at all. The last entry was 5 words long. Subject is no longer contained. Very far away, it was morning. Kael stood on a mountain in clean light, breathing hard, laughing at something Goku had said. The violet came and went on its own now, and it no longer frightened him. He knew none of this. Then his scouter woke by itself. Nothing was transmitting. Nothing had been on that frequency in 100 years, and something was on it now. A designation came through. His designation, the old one, the one from the ledger. And it was spoken in his own voice, calm and unhurried and entirely wrong. Kael looked up at the empty sky. He did not know what any of it meant yet. He only knew that it had found him first. Kael told them at the table in daylight, and it sounded insane out loud. A dead frequency, his old designation, his own voice saying it back to him. Vegeta did not sit down. 100 years of nothing on that channel, he said, and now it knows where you sleep. That is not a message. That is a hand reaching out to check you are still there. Goku went quiet, which was worse. He said he could not feel anything out there. Not a Kai signature, not a trace. Whatever was coming did not register as alive. 4 days. Kael slept badly and trained worse. Every time the scouter clicked, he was on his feet before he knew he had moved. On the 5th morning, the sky changed. Not a pod. Something larger came down slow and unhurried, with no burn on the hull, as if it had all the time it needed. It settled in the field where Kael had first smelled grass. The hatch opened. Nothing came out for a long moment, and the birds stopped. Then it stepped down into the light, and it was wearing his face. Same black spiky hair, same build, same hands. But the eyes were flat mirrored silver with no pupils in them, and the expression underneath was slack and unused, like a room nobody had ever lived in. No violet, no scar. It spoke the designation again, his designation, calm, unhurried, and entirely wrong, in a voice that was his own. Vegeta went first, because of course he did. He crossed the field in a blink and put everything he had into the jaw of the thing. It turned its head with the punch. Then it turned back. And it hit Vegeta with the same movement Kael used. The identical shoulder drop and the identical step through, executed better than Kael had ever managed it. No aura, no light, no effort at all. It fought like someone reading from a page it had memorized a very long time ago. Goku got between them and held it for 11 seconds, and those 11 seconds cost him a rib. He was grinning anyway, the way he did when the number in front of him was bad. Then the thing stopped fighting. It set Goku down almost carefully, and it walked past Vegeta as though neither of them had ever been in the field, and it looked at Kael. "You are the copy," it said in his voice. "I have the paperwork." The thing with his face held out a flat grey slate, and the writing on it was in a language Kael had not seen since he was a child in a tank. Specimen 17, recovered, returned, and underneath, in a smaller hand, a note that had been added recently. Non-conforming. Vegeta told him not to read it. Vegeta said paperwork was what cowards used when they could not win a field, and he spat blood on the grass to make the point. Then he stood there with one arm hanging wrong and waited to be argued with. But Kael read it. He read all of it, line by line, the way you read something you already know is going to hurt. And the dates were wrong in a way he could not argue with. The record had him leaving the tank 9 years before he remembered leaving it. 9 years he could not account for and had never once thought to look for. Goku sat against the shuttle with one arm strapped across his ribs and asked the only question that mattered. "Do you remember your mother?" Kael did not. He remembered a room. He remembered a number. He remembered the sound of a lid closing. The duplicate waited through all of it, without moving, without breathing hard, without ever once looking away. It had the patience of something that had never had anywhere else to be. Then Kael saw it, and it went through him colder than the slate had. The thing had no tail, no scar, no aura. Everything Kael had earned since the day he came down was missing from it because it had been copied before any of it happened, which meant the thing standing in front of him was not a copy of who he was now. It was a copy of what he had been on the shelf. He said it out loud. "You are older than me." And for the first time, the flat silver eyes moved. It said the word deviation. It said that a unit which acquires damage stops matching its entry, and an entry that stops matching gets closed. It said all of this the way a man reads out a weather report. Then the sky went white at the edges, and 3 points of light came down over the tree line in a slow, controlled line, and Goku got up even though he should not have. "They are not here for me," the thing said in his voice, almost kindly. "They never were." The three of them came down without sound and stood in a line at the edge of the grass, and not one of them looked at the duplicate. Sealed grey-white suits, mirrored faceplates, a single numeral stenciled on each chest, and nothing else on them anywhere. No rank, no insignia, no name. The middle one raised a slate that matched the one the duplicate was holding and read out a closure order in the flat voice of a clerk who had done this many thousands of times. Entry 17. Non-conforming. Recovered specimen to be reconciled with the record and the record to be closed on sight. Vegeta asked what reconciled meant. He asked it standing on a leg that was broken in 2 places, which was the only way Vegeta had ever asked anything. The collector answered him without turning its head. It said the entry and the specimen no longer match, so the difference gets removed. Not the boy, the difference. Kael understood it a beat before the other two did, and the cold of it went all the way down. They had not come here to kill him. They had come to take back everything he had become. The scar, the tail, the violet. The 9 years he could not remember, and every year since that he could. All of it filed under one word: damage. Goku moved first because Goku always moved first. One arm still strapped across his ribs. He did not get 2 steps. There was no blast and there was no sound. The air in front of him simply stopped being air, and Goku hung there inside it with his fist still going forward and his eyes still open. Vegeta went in after him and stopped the same way, and the field held the two of them like insects set in glass, and the collectors had not so much as changed stance. Then Kael did the one thing none of them had planned for. He put his hands down and he walked toward the light on his own. Because the record had 9 years in it that he did not, and these 3 were the only things in the universe that could read it to him. The middle collector stepped aside to let him pass, and as it turned, Kael saw the back of the suit, and there was a sheath stitched into it, long and tapered and empty. A sheath cut for a tail. Kael stopped walking, and then quietly, from somewhere inside that suit, something answered him in a language he had not heard since the tank. The voice inside the suit said 4 words in the language of the tank, and Kael understood every one of them without ever having been taught it. It said, "You came back early." The other 2 collectors did not react. They stood in their line with the field humming behind them, holding Goku and Vegeta in the air like an afterthought. Kael asked the only thing that mattered. He asked what was inside the suit. And the middle collector reached up with both hands and unsealed its own faceplate, which was the first thing any of them had done that was not in the procedure. The face underneath was Saiyan, older, grey at the temples, a hard flat scar running where a tail base used to sit, closed over long ago and stitched clean. It said, "Entry 16, recovered, reconciled, retained. They do not close entries. They fit them with a suit and they send them out to collect the next one." Kael looked at the empty sheath again and understood what it was for. It was not built for a tail, it was built to hold the place where one had been. He asked how long. The answer came back flat. 91 years, and every one of them spent bringing in his own. Then Entry 16 did the second thing that was not in the procedure. He turned the slate around so Kael could read it himself. 9 years of blank rows, and then one line at the very bottom, entered by hand and never corrected. Subject removed from the tank without authorization. Somebody had taken him out early. Somebody who was on that station, who had a code, and who never found a reason. Kael asked who. Entry 16 looked past him at the 2 Saiyans hanging in the field, and said that the name on the release was still active. Still active meant still alive. 9 years of nothing, and at the end of it a living person with a name, walking around somewhere with the answer in their head. And then the field let go, and Goku and Vegeta dropped onto the grass, and Entry 16 sealed his faceplate and said the part he was not supposed to say, "Run," before the other 2 file it. They ran. Kael carried Vegeta over one shoulder and Goku limped along on his own, and the tree line came up fast and dark, and nobody followed them. Nobody followed because collectors do not chase. They file. The 2 of them stood exactly where they had been left, slates up, working. That was worse. An hour out, in a ravine with the water gone from it, Kael put Vegeta down in the dirt. The leg was wrong in 2 places. The first thing out of the mouth of Vegeta was not thank you. He asked what Kael had seen on that slate, so Kael said the name out loud for the first time. Chard, and Vegeta stopped breathing for a second because he knew it. Not a collector, not one of their scientists. a records officer of the royal house, one of the men of his father, which broke the shape of everything they thought they understood. The tank was never only a collector operation. Somebody Saiyan had known Kael existed and had a code and used it. Goku read it the kind way. He said it meant somebody wanted you out of there. Vegeta read it the other way. He said it meant somebody wanted him out early and never once wrote down what for. Then Kael remembered the rest of the slate. Under the first line there was a second one, same hand, never corrected. It said, "Do not reconcile." A records officer had written a standing instruction protecting a specimen he had no authority over, and then walked into 91 years of nothing. Still active, not a memory and not a ghost. A code that had touched the record 11 days ago. So Kael said the thing he had been walking toward for 20 parts. He said he was going to the record. Vegeta told him what that meant. The record is the place that files you. You do not walk into it. You get walked in. Goku said he was going anyway, one arm still strapped across his ribs, grinning like it was a sparring trip, and back on the grass the two of them finished the filing, and it was not the entry of Kael that closed that night. The numeral on the middle suit went dark, and neither of them looked up. Morning came and Vegeta could not walk, and he would not be carried into a building that files people. So he stayed in the ravine with his leg splintered in a piece of his own armor. His last word to Kael was not good luck. It was count the doors. Kael and Goku went without him. One arm still strapped across the ribs, and Goku was still coming, because that was never going to be a question. The record was not a fortress. It was a low grey building on flat cracked ground with no fence, no towers and no guards. And the door was already standing open. Nothing stopped them. That was the part Kael could not settle. He kept waiting for the thing that stops you, and the thing that stops you never came. Inside there was a corridor of numerals running away into the dark. Further than the outside of the building had any right to be. 10 steps in, a station woke up on its own and printed one line without anybody touching it. Kael leaned over and read it. It was him. Arrived. Goku looked back the way they had come, and there was no way they had come. Just a wall with a numeral stenciled on it. Count the doors. There had never been any. Station 11 was charred, dust on the housing, a chair pushed neatly in, 91 years of nobody sitting in it, and one live indicator burning in the grime. Kael pulled his own file. It came out longer than his arm and longer than his life, and almost none of it was in his handwriting. The release was there, signed with the code exactly as he had seen it, and under it, in the same hand, never once corrected. Do not reconcile, and under both of those, dated 11 days ago in handwriting that belonged to somebody else entirely. A third line. Reconciliation scheduled. Somebody had overridden a dead man, which meant charred was not the only thing still touching this record, and whoever else was touching it had not bothered to hide. One shelf across was the file for entry 16. Closed. Reason given, assistance rendered to an unreconciled specimen. That was Kael's sentence, written out neatly on somebody else. Then the intercom opened. It did not use his name. It used the designation off the side of the tank, and it told him he was 11 days late. And the lights came on ahead of them, one section at a time, walking them deeper, and nothing closed behind them because nothing had ever opened. The corridor ended in a room that was warm, and that was the wrong thing, because nothing else in that building had any temperature at all. There was a tank in it, upright, occupied. The tubing had not been connected to the wall so much as grown into it, and the voice from the intercom was coming out of the housing at its base. They could not see a face. A shape behind the glass, one aged hand laid flat against the inside of it, and a voice that had not been hurried by anything in a century. He had not been hiding. He said it the way a clerk reads back an entry. He had been filed. That is what the record does to a records officer who writes an instruction he cannot authorize. So Kael asked the only question he had carried for 22 parts. Not who are you? Not what is this place? Why did you pull me out early? And Chard said, because your reconciliation was 14 days away, and I had read your file before I stamped it. Then he explained the word, and the word was worse than the building. Reconcile does not mean review. When two entries describe the same specimen, the record resolves them down to one, and the redundant one stops. Kael stood there and did the arithmetic on himself. He was the redundant one, which is a sentence with an obvious second half, and he did not want to say it out loud. There was another entry, filed as the original, never closed, still listed active. Goku asked it for him, and there was nothing in his face when he did. Is he a person, or is he a copy? Chard said, the file says copy, and then he said the part that mattered. The file is the only thing anybody has ever asked. 11 days ago, the other entry moved. First movement in 91 years. That is what made a dead code touch a dead record. Chard had one authority left, and it was enough to surface one location. He said what it would cost. Pulling that entry would log Kael permanently as located. Kael said do it. The location came up on the slate, and Goku read it before he did and stopped smiling. Then the tank went quiet. Not dramatically, just out, the way a light goes out, a code spent all the way to the end. And the corridor opened behind them, because there is no reason to hold a thing you can already find. And back at the ravine, Vegeta was not alone. Entry 16 was standing over him with a dead black numeral and an open hand, and the location on the slate said Earth. The ravine held the last of the light. Vegeta was propped against the rock with his leg splinted straight in front of him, and the thing standing over him was not holding a weapon. It was holding out a hand. Vegeta did the arithmetic in about a second. Broken leg, no aura left, nobody close enough to reach him, and he refused the hand anyway because he has never taken one in his life, and he was not going to start with that. 16 did not argue. He reached up and unsealed his own collar instead and let the faceplate hang open and empty and said the numeral on his chest is dead. Nobody is coming for him either. Then Kael came down the slope with Goku behind him and the slate still lit in his hand. 16 looked at the location on it for a long moment. Then he asked one question. Did you surface this, or did somebody surface it for you? Kael said he asked for it. He said Chard spent his last authority on it because Kael told him to. And 16 closed his eyes and told him what asking had done. Surfacing a location does not find an entry. That is not what it is for. It tells the entry where the other one is. That is why they do not send collectors to a reconciliation. There would be nothing for a collector to do. The record does not carry it out. It does not need to. The record does not choose which one stops. The two entries do. Putting them in the same room is the entire procedure, start to finish. 16 has seen one finish. He did not describe it. He said only that he was the one still standing at the end, and that is the reason they gave him the suit. Then the location resolved properly, and it was not a facility, and it was not ice. It was a house, on a road, in a small cold town in the north of the planet they were standing on, because the original entry was never stored. It was placed, one release, one signature, one day. One specimen went into a tank, and the other one went out through a door into daylight. He has a name that nobody assigned him. A house, a trade, 91 years of ordinary mornings, and no file anywhere with his face in it. He has never been told what he is. He does not know there is a record. And 11 days ago, he shut his door behind him and started walking north, and he could not have told anybody why. Goku was the one who worked out what 11 days ago was. 11 days ago, Kael came out of his tank. One specimen, two lives, switched on together. He was not hidden and he was not hunted. He was given 91 years of a life, and then it stood up and started walking. The ravine emptied out slowly. Vegeta could not stand and would not be carried, so they propped him against the rock with water and what was left of the light, and he told them to go before he had to say it twice. Nobody argued with him. There was nothing left to argue about. Kael wanted to leave alone. He said it plainly. He said the location was his doing, the surfacing was his doing, and whatever was walking toward them was walking because of something he had asked a dying man to sign. Goku did not even look up. He said no, and that was the end of it. 16 came as well. He did not offer, and nobody invited him. He simply started north with them, faceplate hanging open, collar unsealed, a dead numeral on his chest, and no weapon anywhere on him. 4 hours in, Kael asked the question he had been carrying since the slate lit. He asked whether the two of them could simply refuse. Stay apart, never stand in the same room as each other. Let the whole thing rot in a drawer for another 91 years. 16 said that had been tried. He said it politely, the way you tell somebody their idea is an old one. Reconciliation does not need agreement. It does not need a fight, and it does not need a room. It needs the distance to be closing. It starts the moment the pairing is known to the record, and it does not stop because two people would rather it did not. It works on the file and not the body. Two entries cannot both be current. The record does not care which one it keeps. It only cares that one of them stops being a duplicate of the other. Kael asked how long they had. 16 said that depends on the distance, and then he said the part that took the ground out from under all three of them. It began when the location resolved. It has been running since yesterday evening. They walked through the night. The land flattened out under them. Fences appeared, and then a road with paint on it, and then a signpost with a town name on it that meant nothing to any of them. Goku noticed it first. Kael had stopped talking in whole sentences. He would start one and lose the middle of it, and stand there with his mouth working, hunting for a word he had owned his entire life and could not find anywhere. He said it was nothing. He said he was tired. He was not tired. 16 watched it happen and said nothing at all, and the nothing he said told Goku everything he needed. At dawn they came over a rise, and the town was below them, low and grey and completely ordinary. Smoke going straight up in the cold, one bakery light on, and nobody in the street yet. And on the road out of the far side of it, about 4 miles ahead of them, there was a figure. An old man in a heavy coat, walking north, unhurried, exactly where the slate had said he would be. Then he stopped. In the middle of an empty road, with nothing on either side of him and nowhere in particular to be, he simply stopped walking. He stood still for a long moment. Then he turned around, and he faced the rise, and he started walking south. Toward them. He could not have seen them at that distance. He could not have heard them either. He did not need to. He had felt Kael arrive, and something inside him had answered it, without asking his permission first. The old man came up the road at the pace of a man with nowhere in particular to be. They stood on the rise and watched him climb toward them, and none of the three of them moved. It took him 20 minutes. He did not hurry once. When he was close enough to read, Kael stopped breathing. The face under the white hair was a face he shaved every morning. Older by a lifetime, softened by weather and by kindness, with no scar on it at all. But it was the same face. The old man looked at the three of them for a while. He did not ask who they were. He said he had been expecting somebody for about 11 days, that he had no idea who, and that they all looked cold, and then he asked them in. The house sat at the end of a lane behind the bakery, small, warm, low ceilings. He filled a kettle and put 4 cups on the table without counting them, and he made tea for the man in the hazard suit exactly as carefully as he made it for anybody else. He told them he had woken 11 days ago, knowing he had to go north. Not a voice, not a dream. Just the certainty a man gets about rain. He had been walking ever since, and this morning it had let go of him. So he had turned round. He said his name was Tam. He said nobody had given it to him, that he had simply had it, the way he had simply had hands. He had mended shoes in that town for 61 years. People still brought him boots he had sold twice already. Then he said the thing. He said he had to apologize because he was going to sound mad. But he had the same dream every night of his life. Cold water, dark, an amber light that never changed brightness, and a slow tap somewhere behind his head that never once missed. Kael put his cup down so carefully that it made no sound at all. That was not a dream. That was the inside of the tank. That was the pump above his left shoulder, ticking at 9-second intervals, in the dark, for 91 years. 16 spoke without looking up. He said the split had never been fair. One entry had gone into a house and a trade and 61 years of boots. The other had gone into storage. Somebody had to hold the 91 years of nothing, and both of them had. And then the old man apologized, not for the dream, for the life. He said that if he had known somebody was in the dark for the whole of it, he would not have enjoyed the mornings quite so much. That was the thing that took the legs out from under Kael. Goku asked whether it could be undone. 16 said they had it wrong. They were not two copies of one man sitting in a kitchen. They were one entry that had been cut in half 91 years ago, and the two halves had started closing. It showed while they sat there. Kael went for a word, an ordinary one, and lost it, and stopped. And across the table the old man said the word for him, quietly, without thinking about it, and then looked at his own mouth as if it had gone off somewhere on its own. A minute later, the old man could not remember the name of the lane he had lived on for 6 decades. He laughed about it. He said it happens at his age. Nobody in that kitchen laughed with him, and he noticed that. And he stopped. He said one more thing before they left the table. He said he had always laid out 2 cups. Every morning, for 60 years, without knowing why, and he had never once been able to explain it to anybody who asked. He had simply always known there was somebody else. Kael said his own name out loud because it was the one word he could still reach for and find. And across the table, the old man said it at exactly the same moment, in exactly the same voice, and neither of them had meant to say anything at all. One second after they said the same name in the same voice, nothing in that kitchen moved. The kettle ticked as it cooled. 4 cups sat where an old man had set them out without counting. And then the light in the room went wrong, the way light goes wrong just before weather, and both of them felt it at once. It started in the hands. Kael looked down at the table because his fingers had done something he had not asked them to do, and across from him, the old man was looking at his own hands with the same confusion. The same small gesture made twice by 2 people who had never met until yesterday. Then Kael reached for a word, and the word was not there. Not slow, not on the tip of his tongue. Gone, the way a stair is gone when the step is missing. He stopped in the middle of a sentence and stood there inside the gap where an ordinary word used to live. And Tam aged while they watched him. Not all at once, nothing dramatic. A month at a time, in the skin at his temples, in the extra second it took him to lift his head, in how carefully he had to plan standing up. 91 years began spending itself faster than it should. Kael tasted bread, warm and cheap and slightly burnt at the base, out of an oven he had never stood in front of, in a bakery he had never entered. On a morning that belonged to somebody else. It was the best thing that had ever happened to him. It was also being taken out of a living man. Across the table, the old man went rigid and said that the water was cold. He was sitting in a warm kitchen with his hands round a mug, and he was drowning in a tank 91 years away, in the dark, under an amber light, listening to a pump he had never seen. Goku got between them. He took hold of Kael by the shoulders and pulled, and Kael came away from that table as easily as anybody comes away from a table, and nothing stopped. No resistance, no snap. Distance was not a lever because there was nothing in the room to pull against. That is when 16 said the sentence that took the last door away. It does not need them to agree. It does not need them to touch. It does not even need them in the same building. Proximity was never the mechanism. Proximity only told the record where the 2 of them were standing. Kael turned on him. Whatever was left of his voice went into one question. 16 had walked out of his own reconciliation. 16 had called himself the one still standing for 40 years. So Kael wanted to know exactly how a man does that, and he wanted to know now. And 16 sat down. In 26 parts, nobody had ever seen him sit down. He said that he did not win. He said her designation was 16 as well, that she worked it out 3 days before he did, and that she stopped on purpose, and he felt every year of her arrive in him like a debt he had not agreed to carry. He kept the suit because a hazard suit is honest about what is inside it. Sealed, numbered, handled at arm's length. He has been the surviving half of somebody who chose to stop for 4 decades, and not 1 hour of it has made him whole. It made him hollow. That is all it does. On the table between them, the record showed what it always showed. 1 entry, 2 halves, and one of those halves had already begun to dim quietly, without asking anybody, the way a lamp goes down when the power is being drawn somewhere else in the house. Then Tam reached across and took Kael by the hand. He was not comforting him. Kael understood that immediately, and it was worse than comfort. The old man was checking, feeling carefully the way a man tests a floorboard, working out how much of the person opposite him was still there. So Kael tried to say his own name. It was the one word he had held on to through all of it. The only thing he had ever been able to prove, and this time he reached for it and came back with nothing at all. Tam did not fill it in for him. Tam had heard it go. 4 miles south, at the ravine, Vegeta sat propped against cold stone where they had left him, unable to stand, unable to travel, and turned his head north because he could feel the direction of it. He knew what was happening in that kitchen. He said one word. He said hollow. Nobody slept. The grey light came up over the lane and found 4 cups washed and put back on the shelf exactly where they had been the night before, because none of them could think of anything else to do with their hands. The old man was up first. He was thinner than he had been yesterday, a decade thinner, and when he lifted the kettle, he lifted it with one hand only, because the other would not hold steady long enough to be trusted with hot water. The young Saiyan reached for his own name and found the same empty shelf he had found the night before. He knew the shape of the space it used to occupy. He knew the length of it and the sound it was supposed to make. What came out of him was air. The man with the rust-colored hair said it for him quietly, without making a thing of it. And somehow that was worse than the silence had been. The tall one stood at the window with a small handheld reader cupped in both palms, and he did not move for a long time. 2 figures crossed the little screen, and beside each of them a rate, and the 2 rates were not the same. He read it twice. He read it a 3rd time. Then he put the reader face down on the sill and said nothing at all, which told the room everything. The old man did the sum himself. He did it at the kitchen table, out loud, on his fingers, the way a man checks whether there is enough money left to see out the week. So much a day. So many days in a month. Carry the remainder. He got to the end of his fingers and he did not look frightened. He looked like a man who had found the answer he already suspected, and the answer was not in years. Because the arithmetic was one-sided and everybody in that kitchen could see it. The young one had decades of words to lose. He could give up 1,000 of them and still have language enough to argue with. The old one had months of years, and the closing was spending them at a speed neither of them had chosen, and neither could slow, and it would finish him long before it finished emptying the boy. Afterwards, the old man went out to the bench. He put 61 years of tools away, the awls first, then the knives, then the little curved blade he had ground down so far it was more handle than steel, then the last hammer, which he held for a moment before he set it in beside the rest. He laid them in order, he closed the lid on the box, and he did not open it again. The one with the rust-colored hair followed him out and stood beside the shed with his strapped arm held close to his chest, and the 2 of them looked at the frost on the lane instead of at each other. 2 men and no fight anywhere in either of them. Nothing to hit, nothing to shield. He did not smile. He had not smiled in days, and he did not start there. Then the old man came back inside, sat down in his own chair, put both hands flat on the table so they would stop shaking, and said it plainly, the way he had rehearsed it out at the bench. He would yield. It could be done. If the record needed one name to close on, then it would have his, and everybody could stop pretending there was a kinder version of this. The young one was on his feet before the sentence finished, fists down on the table, hard enough to jump the cups. No aura, nothing behind him but shaking. He said no. He said it 4 different ways, and every one of them came out missing the one word he had wanted to put in front of it, the word that would have made the refusal his own, instead of just loud. The old man was almost smiling. 91 years, he said, is not a long time when you sit down and count it. But he had counted it, and it had come to enough. Bread out of an oven, boots mended properly, frost on a lane at 6 in the morning. A dog that had never been his, sleeping under his bench for 11 winters. The boy had been given none of that, and was owed all of it. Then the man with the rust-colored hair put his good arm out across the table between them, and his jaw was set, and he said the thing nobody else was willing to say. Taking it would be the same as killing him. Slower, politer, with tea on the table, but the same. And he would not stand in a warm kitchen and watch a man hand his life across a teapot as though it were the sugar. The record had 2 halves on it, and one of them was going dark. There was a line on that card that only went one direction, and it did not care which of the 2 names sat above it, and it had been falling for longer than any of them had been in that house. The tall one sat down slowly with the empty faceplate resting on his knees and told them the worst part in the flattest voice he had. Yielding cannot be prevented. It is not a door anybody else can stand in front of. Hers had done it while he was asleep in the next room, with his boots still on, and nobody got a vote, least of all him. At the end of it, the young one asked the old man for time. Not for a plan, not for a promise, just for time, and he asked it with his hands on the table and not touching. The old man looked at him for a while, at his own face 91 years younger, and said he would promise one thing only, and the one thing was this: not today. At dusk, the tall one climbed the ravine and told the propped-up prince all of it, while the wind came up off the rocks. The prince could not stand. He could barely turn his head. He listened to the whole thing, and when it was finished, he said, "Stop arguing with the men. Neither of them is the problem. Go at the record." They left before dawn. 2 of them stood at the cottage door in the dark, with their boots already on and the lamp still burning behind them on the table, and neither of them said anything about where they were going, because saying it out loud would have made it into a plan, and a plan can fail. The kitchen was still warm from the night. Nobody in that house had slept properly in 3 days, and it had begun to show on all 4 of them. Before he went, the young Saiyan crouched down in front of the chair by the fire and made the man with the rust-colored hair promise him something. Stay in the chair. Not the yard, not the woodpile, not the end of the lane to see how the weather was coming. The chair. Because if the old man made up his mind while the 2 of them were out on a hillside, then there would be nothing left in this whole business to argue about, and the promise was given without a single word of complaint. The walk out took most of the grey morning, frost on the ruts, the hedges black and bare, a country with nothing living in it that would show itself. The tall one set the pace, and it was the pace of a man going somewhere he had sworn to himself he would never go again, which is faster than a comfortable walk and never once slows for the view. They did not talk. There was nothing either of them could say that would still be true by the afternoon. The annex was cut into the side of a hill, and it had been dead for a long time. 2 blast doors stood half open where somebody had walked out and not bothered to close up behind them. Inside there was dust on everything, and rows of racks in the dark, and not one light on any of them. It did not look like a place where records were kept. It looked like a place where they had been abandoned on purpose. The tall one had been there before. Once, he said so on the threshold without being asked, in the flat voice he used for the things that had cost him the most, and then he said the rest of it in 4 words. For my own. He did not explain any further, and the young one did not push him, because by then he had learned what those short sentences were made of and how much they took out of the man who had to carry them. They brought a single rack up on emergency power and a pale blue panel lit in the dark. And for the first time in his life, the young Saiyan looked at his own entry as a living thing. Not a report about him, not a summary read out by somebody else in a corridor. The object itself, the thing every door in his life had been locked or unlocked by, sitting in a cold room in a dead hill, entirely indifferent to the fact that he had come all this way to see it. One file, two halves. Everything the old man had said at the kitchen table 3 nights ago, sitting there in the light of a panel, stated plainly and without any apology. One half of the shape was bright and the other was dimmed almost out, and there was no argument to be had with it, because it was not an opinion, it was a record, and it had been right about him for 91 years while everybody else guessed. So he tried to delete it. He tried the obvious thing that any person would try, and he found out something that took the ground out from under him. There is no delete. An entry cannot be removed. It cannot be unmade or erased or lost or burned or forgotten. It can only be restated. The system that had made a copy of him and then thrown the copy into a tank had never once been given a way to admit that it had done so. Then the tall one leaned in over his shoulder and found the thing that did work, and his hand actually shook when he pointed at it. A status, 1 of 9, sitting quietly in a list that nobody had looked at in decades. Closed. A closed entry cannot be reconciled. The procedure has nothing to act on and no halves to pair, and it stops the moment the status lands, and it stops for good. And then they read the rest of the line, and the room got very quiet. Closing an entry requires a subject. One name in one field, typed by the one it belongs to. The system would accept exactly one, and it did not want a witness, or a signature, or a reason. It wanted a name. And the name that went into that box was the half that would stop. The young one said he would do it. He said it straight away, before the tall one had finished reading the line out, without a moment of hesitation and without a single condition attached to it. Put me in it. He had spent his whole short life trying to prove he was a person and not a copy, and it turned out that the proof, when it finally came, was going to take about 4 seconds and cost him everything he had. It is worth looking at the thing itself for a moment, because it is such a small thing. A card on a pale panel. A row of numbers that meant a planet and a batch and a date. A status field, and in the status field the word closed, waiting. And underneath it one empty box the width of about 9 letters, with a cursor sitting in it, blinking at whatever patience a dead machine in a dead hill has. That was the whole exit, 9 letters wide. Then he reached for his own name to put it in the box, and it was the same empty shelf. He knew the shape of the space, he knew the length of the word, and the sound it was supposed to make when somebody else said it. Nothing came. He stood there with his hand stopped over a panel in a dead archive, willing to end himself to save an old man, and unable to spell who he was. The tall one tried to enter it for him. The field would not take it. A subject must name himself. They came home at dusk, and the man with the rust-colored hair was still in the chair. He had not moved once in 11 hours, and he had been right not to, because the old man was awake at the table, and he was thinner again, and he had known where they had gone since the moment the door shut. He let them tell him all of it. He waited until they were finished, then he said the quiet, terrible thing, and he said it kindly, which made it worse. I know my name. I have said it every day for 91 years. I am the only one of us who can fill in that box. Later, up in the ravine, the tall one told the propped-up prince everything, and the prince did not ask a single question about the file. He lay against the cold rock with his back broken and his legs useless and his eyes closed, and he thought about it for a long time. Then he said the only thing in the whole arc that had ever sounded like a way out. Forget the file. Get the boy his name back. They came down out of the ravine before there was any light in the sky at all, and by the time they reached the cottage, the frost had gone hard on the lane and nobody had slept. Vegeta had given them one instruction, and it was not about the record. Get the boy his name back. That was the whole plan. It was a good plan, and it was the only plan, and it depended entirely on a single word that Kael had lost somewhere between the field and the archive, and no part of that night went well. 16 tried everything he had. He worked through it the way a man works through a checklist he has run before and never once seen succeed. Recovery by repetition, recovery by association. The cold, flat procedures they had used in the annex, the ones with no comfort in them at all. He asked Kael what his mother would have called him, and Kael did not have a mother. He asked what the tank had called him, and the tank had called him a batch number. Every route came back to the same empty shelf. Then Goku tried, because Goku only has one method, and it has never once been complicated. He sat forward in that kitchen chair with his strapped arm across his knee, and he said the name out loud. Just said it, plain, the way you would call somebody in from a yard. And then he said it again. And again, all through the small hours, patient as weather, as if the word were a door that would eventually give if a big enough man kept knocking. Kael heard it every single time. He could not hold on to any of it. And Tam watched them do it. That was the part none of them could stand. He sat in his chair by the stove with a blanket over his knees, and he watched 3 men tear a night apart, trying to find one word, and he was kind about it. He told Goku he had a good voice for it. He told 16 he had clearly done this before and was better at it than he thought. He never once said the thing he was obviously thinking, which was that they were spending hours they did not have. Near 4 in the morning, Kael finally asked him what it was actually like now, on his side of it, and Tam thought about the question properly before he answered it. The way he had answered every question since the day they walked into his kitchen. He said it was not frightening. He said it was like a room going quiet. Like somebody moving through a house at the end of an evening, turning out lamps, one at a time, in no particular hurry, and every time one went out, there was a little less of the room, and you minded a little less that it had gone. Kael went down on one knee at the side of that chair and asked him to wait. Just a day. One day, and 16 will get it back, and I will put my own name in that box myself, and none of this touches you. And Tam looked at him with Kael's own eyes 91 years older and told him the truth, because he had never once lied to any of them. I do not have a day. You know I do not have a day. And Kael did know, and that was the worst of it, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. Morning came up grey behind the small windows, and Tam got out of the chair, slowly with both hands on the arms of it, and went to the stove and put the kettle on. Nobody stopped him. He had put that kettle on every morning for 61 years, before the shop, before the shutter came up, before any of this arrived at his door in the shape of 3 armed strangers, and there was no version of this morning where he was going to do anything else. So they sat at the table, all 4 of them, in a small warm kitchen with the light coming up outside and steam on the window. Nobody used the word yielding, nobody had to use it. 16 had explained in part 26 exactly what this looked like, and every man at that table had been carrying the shape of it ever since, and now it was simply here, sitting between the cups, waiting for somebody to be brave enough to be practical. Tam put both hands flat on the wood, and he spoke plainly, because plain was the only way he had ever done anything. He said, I have had 91 years. A road, a trade, a shop, a woman who laughed at me in a doorway for 30 of them. You have had 9 months and a tank and a war you did not ask for. That is not a decision, lad. That is arithmetic. And you would not be arguing with me if you were not so frightened of the sum. He did not ask permission. That is the thing that will follow Kael for the rest of the series. Tam did not put it to a vote, did not make a speech, did not close his eyes and brace like a man going under. He simply stopped holding on. Whatever it is that a person grips without knowing they are gripping it, he opened his hand and set it down, and the reconciliation turned towards him the way a tide turns, without malice, without sound, and began to close. Kael came across that table to stop it, and there was nothing there. Nothing to grab, nothing to hit, nothing to put a fist through, and no enemy anywhere in the room. 29 parts of this series have been solved by hitting something, and here was the one thing that could not be. He got a handful of an old grey jumper and an old man's shoulder underneath it, and he was strong enough to lift a house, and it did him no good at all, because you cannot hold on to a rope for somebody who has already let go. And then 91 years arrived all at once. Not a war and not a tank. A wet road at 6 in the morning with the tarmac shining. The smell of leather and glue and hot wax. A shutter going up with a bang and a bad shoulder complaining about it. Rain on a shop window for an entire afternoon with nobody coming in. A woman laughing in a doorway. A yard and somebody calling a name across it. And the extraordinary ordinary business of turning round because that name belongs to you. Kael came out of it on the kitchen floor on his hands and knees with the wood grain an inch from his face, shaking so hard the cups were going on the table above him. He was full. That is the only word for it. Full of 61 years of mending other people's shoes and 30 more before that, and every grey Tuesday in between, a whole life he did not live, delivered by the one man in the universe who had the right to keep it and did not. And Tam was still in the chair. He had gone the way he did everything else, quietly, without fuss, without making anybody watch. Goku stood over him for a long time with his head down and his good hand on the back of that chair and did not say one word, and Goku is a man who always has something to say. 16 stood at the window with his back to the room. Nobody cried, nobody shouted. The kettle went on boiling until 16 reached over and moved it off the heat. Kael got up off that floor eventually and went and stood in the doorway with the full light coming in, and he said his own name out loud, first time in 3 parts. It came out steady, and it came out his, because Tam had handed him that as well and had not made any kind of fuss about doing it. And 16, unmasked, standing at his shoulder, finally said the thing he had been carrying since he was young. That is what it is. Not the winner, the one still standing. The kettle had gone cold on the stove and nobody had moved to touch it. Kael sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cupboard doors and his hands open on his knees. And behind him, in the chair by the window, Tam sat with his eyes closed and his head tipped very slightly towards the light. The way a man sits when he has finished something. There was no noise in that house. There was no wind and no rain and no clock. There was only Kael, breathing carefully like a man carrying a full cup across a crowded room. Because he was carrying 91 years of somebody else, and he was terrified of spilling any of it. The plate woke on the table. It was thin and grey, and it had been dark since the ravine, and now a pale light moved across it the way light moves under a door. 16 reached over and turned it flat so all of them could see it. No alarm, no summons, no procedure to attend. The system that had spent 91 years insisting there was a duplicate on its books had simply gone quiet and finished its arithmetic and written down the result, and it was neither sorry nor cruel about any of it. It was finished. That was all a system ever is. Kael picked it up. His hands were shaking so badly that Goku put one hand under his wrist to steady it, and neither of them said anything about that. There was one line on the plate where there had always been 3. No duplication flag, no reconciliation pending, no secondary designation. One word in the small, dull lettering that the archive used for facts too ordinary to argue with. Current. He read it 4 times, not a copy, not a spare, not the second attempt at somebody else, the only one. He had waited 30 parts of his short, strange life for a word that plain. They buried Tam in the yard behind the shop, against the low stone wall he had worked at for 61 years, where the light came over in the middle of the afternoon, and the flagstones were worn pale by one man walking the same 8 feet forever. Nobody made a speech. Goku wanted to, and Kael stopped him, gently, because Tam would have hated it, would have sat through it with his hands folded and his mouth doing that patient thing it did, waiting for everybody to be done being loud. So they stood in the grey morning and were quiet with him instead, which was the only language he had ever really used. The shop was still open behind them, in the way that shops are open when their owner has stepped out for a moment and never comes back. The shutter was half up. The bench was there, and the tools were there, laid out in the order of a man who had not needed to look at them for 40 years, every handle worn down into the shape of a hand that no longer existed. There was a shoe in the vise with one seam left to close. Kael stood in the doorway, looking at all of it, and understood, slowly, that it was his now and that he had absolutely no idea how any of it worked. Somebody came up the lane, not fast. Kael heard the footsteps before he turned, and something in the rhythm of them made his chest go tight, because they were even. Vegeta walked up to the wall on his own legs. No crutch, no shoulder to lean on, no ravine and no stretcher, and no lying to anybody about how bad it had been. He stopped and looked at the turned earth and folded his arms and said that he did not know why they had all been standing about looking useless when there was clearly a shop to run, which is how Vegeta says that he is glad. Kael laughed once, badly, and it hurt. And then Goku grinned. It came up on his face slowly, like weather clearing, and it was the first grin any of them had seen out of him since the day this whole thing started, since the tanks and the ledgers and the numbered rooms. He looked at Kael standing in a dead man's doorway with a dead man's tools behind him and a word on a plate in his hand, and he said the thing he had been holding on to for 30 parts and had never once been allowed to say out loud. He said, "I told you, you were always somebody." It only took the paperwork a while to catch up. 16 took the suit off in the yard. He did it the way you would expect him to do it, without ceremony, one clasp at a time, and the hazard grey came away in pieces and went down on the flagstones in a heap that looked far smaller on the ground than it had ever looked on a man. The faceplate went on top of it, that flat, dead black numeral facing the sky, and he did not look at it again. Underneath, there was just a person, greying at the temples, thinner than any of them had pictured, squinting in ordinary daylight like a man coming out of a long cinema in the afternoon. Kael asked him what it had actually been for. All those years sealed up in it, when the reconciliation had been over and done with for decades and there was nothing left out there to protect himself from. 16 thought about that for a while. He said that it had never been protection. He said that when you are the one still standing and somebody else stopped so that you could be, you spend the rest of your life looking for somewhere to put that, and a suit with a number on it is somewhere to put it. He said, "I was not hiding from anybody. I was just trying not to be the one who was left." Then they offered him the name. It was Goku who said it, because of course it was. "Take it. Tam. It is yours. It was always half yours. He was you and you were him, and there is nobody left alive who would grudge you a single letter of it." And for about 10 seconds, Kael wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything, because it came with a road and a trade and a shop and 61 years of somebody knowing where he was. And then he shook his head and gave it back, and said that Tam had earned that one himself, all 91 years of it, and it was not going spare. He walked out into the middle of the yard on his own. Nobody followed him. He stood there with his head up and the sky going pale over the wall, and he said his own name out loud to absolutely nobody, the way you test a step before you put your weight on it. Kael, not a designation, not a line in a ledger, not a number some technician had written on a tank in wax pencil, not a dead prince's leftovers handed down to fill a gap, just his. The first thing in his whole life that had not been assigned to him by somebody else, and he had said it himself in his own voice, out loud, in a yard. The violet came back. It came up around him low and slow and very quiet, the way a stove comes back when you open the vent, and there was nothing in front of it. No enemy, no archive, no old man walking 4 miles down a road to find him. It just came back on, because it belonged to him, and it had been waiting in the dark for somebody to come home and claim it. Kael stood in it, with his hands loose and his tail hanging easy behind him, and for the first time since he had come out of that tank, nothing in him was arguing with anything else in him. He opened the shop 3 days later. The shutter went up halfway and stuck the way it always had, and he left it that way because that was how the neighbors knew. His first customer was a woman with a cracked heel and no patience, and she watched him make an absolute disaster of a simple seam, and told him so and left the shoe with him anyway because her father had left shoes with the last one. Kael worked at that seam until the light went orange, badly, slowly, gladly, in a room that smelled of leather and glue, and it was the best day of his entire life. Somewhere else, in a room with no windows and no dawn coming, something woke up. A faceplate came on in the dark, cold and slow, with a numeral on it that was not 16. Closing an entry generates a notification. Notifications go out along the lines they were built to go out along, and nobody consulted Kael about which ones, and this one went somewhere he would never have sent it. In the dark, the glow steadied. Whatever was wearing that plate had just been told, in the small, dull lettering the archive keeps for facts too ordinary to argue with, that Kael existed, and it had been waiting a very long time to hear it. Kael stood in the shop doorway at dusk, with the violet just barely on him and his tail loose and the smell of the day still on his hands. 30 parts to become one person. Not the copy, not the spare, not the second attempt, and not the last one standing over anybody either. Just Kael, current, the only one, in a doorway that was his, on a road that was his, in a life that had been handed to him by a kind old man who had done the arithmetic and decided he could afford it. The arc closes here, the story does not. Something out there knows his name now, and he did not tell it.